Good morning, and I can see from my reflection from the screen that it's getting to be so dark in this country of mine that I might have to rethink this whole thing. Hey, let's videotape your face while you're walking to the gym, because at some point it's going to be so dark that you can't see me at all, and maybe that's a good thing, or I don't know. But anywho, I'll figure something out. So I thought I was going to talk about testing strategies and testing in general in software development. Now, this is probably the most it's this thing that everybody talks about, and every single company I've ever spoken with is treating it like it's this phenomenon that is absolutely vital to the software development process, and for the most part it is. The thing that I want to touch on though is that you have in my opinion, there are different ways to handle the actual testing of the way, because there's so many ways you can do it. And I have worked for companies where testing was minimal. I've worked for companies where, quite literally, one of my colleagues got the question, do you think that there is such a thing as too many tests? And he simply said, well, no, I don't think you can test too much. And I just looked at him and said, but then you would never ship anything. You're telling, in my opinion, in theory, you could just simply test every humanly possible, conceivable thing in the world and never get anything done, because you can never, in theory, you could just write tests all day long for everything. Anywho, I'll give you my 2 cents on how I think about unit tests, acceptance tests, and manual testing as well, or what we call regression testing. So, the first and foremost thing when it comes to unit testing, the question you should ask yourself is, at what stage in the development of my product am I? If you are working for a large company, like we're talking about really big company, where the product has matured to a point where the product owners or the brand is already established, you have revenue, you have a lot of employees, and in essence the focus for the project is not so much about development speed, because trust me, nobody, not a single company out there in the big world will ever say, hey, well, we don't care so much about delivery speed. Everybody cares about delivery speed. But if you put that in a position, if you ask the question, right, are you as a company willing to accept that the quality of the product is lower, and you trade that for faster development speed? Most big companies will say no, because they have a brand to protect. They want things to be quality because that's more valuable to them. So, if that is your case, then yes, you should be unit testing as much as humanly possible. And the rule of thumb for unit testing is that you always do something like what basically is called triangulation, or a triangle test, if you will. So you test the minimum input for a function or whatever. You test the edge value, so the maximum that you expect, the minimum you expect, and an arbitrary number in between, so you have full coverage for the different types of output. And you always make sure that you have a test for the success case and one case for every possible failure case that you can imagine. Usually for me, a single function gets, in a type language, 2, maybe 3 tests, unit tests. In JavaScript land it might be a little bit more because of the loose typing and input validation and so forth. And as you can imagine, this takes a little bit more time if you do this for every single function. I also strongly encourage you to start writing code in a functional way. get away from this object-oriented stuff when it comes to designing your methods and function. And if you're doing object-oriented stuff, do at least this one thing, and that is that one very classic thing I see with a lot of developers is that they have an object that they instantiate, and for some reason they have an internal method or a method or even a public method on that object, and they start reaching into the field variables from that method from inside the object. Don't do that. Pass everything. That's the rule of thumb, because things get really messy if you have to build up this internal state and set a lot of field variables and all that other stuff to test that single method. Because if you're referencing field variables from inside your internal method, odds are that you're going to have to do a lot of prep work in order to write your test. But if you pass everything to the method whenever possible, then it's very easy for you to test the method, because the test, it's basically a dependency injection. So that makes it very testable. So those are my rules for unit testing. Now, acceptance testing. Acceptance testing is another, and this is very closely tied into something I really like, which is BDD, or behavioral driven development. Now, you should have a look at Gherkin, which is a pseudo coding language which you can use in order to express features and stuff of that nature. This is something that the Ruby community did really well, and I absolutely love it. Now, this is also this type of thing you only use it if you have a product that has a lot of complexity, a large product, because this also takes a fair amount of time to automate and set up and all of that stuff. Now, when I was working for Ticketmaster, I am still working for Ticketmaster, like they have one of the largest products in the world. And so it made a lot of sense because they have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of possible configuration combinations, which means that you can't in a reasonable amount of time have humans to test all the different combinations. So that's why you automate it, and acceptance testing is amazing for that thing. And that's why I really urge you to take a look, especially if you have a web-based application, take a look at Puppeteer, which is Google's new awesome headless browser that has been released. Take a look at that. That's going to help you a lot. And yeah, once again, keep in mind, only use this is like for a small startup. The same thing with unit testing. If you don't have a solid revenue income or whatever, and if you're about delivery speed and you're willing to trade some product quality for speed, then don't do this, because this will take a lot of time. But do check it out, because it's really helpful. When you start using it, it's going to improve the quality of your code immensely. And my rule of thumb for acceptance testing is, once again, focus on testing the critical paths. In other words, the happy case and the failure case. I usually have 1 or 2, maybe a few more tests per scenario when I write acceptance tests. And don't go crazy. Some people will try to write tests that tries to test every single thing on the interface of their application, like, given that I go to page blah, I should see this button, that button, it should be that color, and blah blah blah. Don't go that specific. Try to keep it generic. Like, try to be a little bit more high level, saying that given that I go to page blah, I should be able to continue to page blah. Something of that nature. There's an entire science behind writing good acceptance tests and expressing them in a very nice and efficient way with behavioral driven development. I will even actually say that once you'll find very quickly that if you don't do that, you'll re-implement the same logic over and over and over. The most classic things you want is something that clicks on something, or something that goes to a certain page. Anywho, lastly, regression testing. Now, you will always have a certain amount of manual testing. That's where the QA team comes in, and the testers, they are great. They are really awesome. And they should be focusing almost exclusively on anything that is on your application that produces money for your application, everything that is business critical. So make a plan that you run through every time you're releasing something, so that they can just check off boxes on that list and test out to make sure that the most critical stuff is still working. So those are my tips.